Geeks and geekettes, calling on the global conglomeration of nerds and enthusiasts and fanboys and fangirls around the world. Yes, it's Wednesday and it's time for Ask Chuck Dixon. Once again, I come back to the microphone to answer questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Now, if you have a question, comment, suggestion, image, whatever you want to send to me, the best way to reach me is brunobookstore@gmail.com. I get questions on Facebook. I get questions in the comment section below these videos. But the most direct way to be absolutely certain I do not miss your question, you can send it to brunobookstore@gmail.com. I look at it every day. If you could do me another favor too, if you haven't already, could you subscribe to this channel? I am within spitting distance of 2,000 subscribers. They tell me that wonderful, amazing things happen when you reach 2,000 subscribers. Hair grows back. Your children will love you more. All kinds of crazy things happen when you reach 2,000. So if you could just do me a little tiny favor and hit that old subscribe button, and that way you'll never miss an episode of Ask Chuck Dixon. Every Wednesday, it'll remind you there's a new episode available. Well, let's get to those questions. Rick Crabtree, have you ever written a screenplay? No. And yes. I don't like the screenplay form. I hate it. I've worked in final draft and I don't like it. It's not friendly to me. There's too many rules. It's too formatted. I feel like I'm typing with someone else's hands. I don't do my best work in final draft. And I've never been attracted to screenwriting because, number one, I don't like the format. Number two, I don't like the whole pitch process. I don't like all the rewriting. I also don't like writing stuff that, has a 1 in a million chance of ever being realized as an entertainment property. Comics have spoiled me. You write a comic book, a few months later, it's on the stands. You write a screenplay, chances are you'll never see it made into a movie. And they'll give you buckets of money, but I don't do this for the buckets of money. The other reason is I talked to a screenwriter in my comics career, and there was a guy he had some success here and there, but he didn't have a lot of success. And what he told me is that most writers' story in Hollywood, and this is most writers, I'm not talking about William Goldman or somebody like that, but most writers in Hollywood, they have early success. If they're going to have any success at all, they have early success. They have a good year. And then they spend 5 more years living in LA trying to repeat that first year, and it never happens for them. And I thought, well, I don't want to do any of that. But as far as screenwriting goes, I have done some. I wrote screenplays for what was proposed to be a CGI animated series for Lionsgate that was going to appear on their website. And there were going to be, I think, 5 or 6 episodes, and they would be assembled eventually into a feature film. And it was going to be, the lead character is going to be voiced by Sylvester Stallone. In fact, it was Stallone that brought me in on the project because he continues to be really interested in CGI. In fact, he's going to be voicing King Shark in the next Suicide Squad movie. And for him, that's the perfect job. You can act in a movie without having to spend 8 hours a day in the gym getting ready for it. So he got me the job. Nothing ever came of it. I wrote the episodes. As I said, not my best work. It wasn't my best work. I didn't feel good about it. I love movies. I understand how they work, but I didn't feel writing them didn't fit for me. It wasn't a good fit for me. But since then, I've gotten another screenwriting job, another paying gig. I did some script doctoring for a screenplay for a project that hasn't been announced yet, so I can't talk about it. But I did some script doctoring because the original screenwriter asked me to. He said he wanted my input the subject matter was in my wheelhouse, and he wanted me to, write, you know, basically fix stuff and add stuff and make the project a little richer. And I said, I hate writing in final draft. He said, well, then don't worry about final draft, just write it, and we'll have people here format it, which worked out fine. But again, still, it wasn't a real comfortable fit for me. I thought I did good work, but unfortunately, once again, comic books spoiled me because in comics you don't have to think about budget so much. And as one of the producers on the film, after reading my additions to the screenplay, he said, if Chuck Dixon and Michael Bay ever got together, they could end Hollywood because of some of the stuff I asked for. So anyway, yeah, I've written screenplays. I don't like it. And I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in with producers who said, well, we'd like you to write a screenplay. And I said, no, I don't want to write one. I've probably turned down potentially, millions of dollars in income, but it's not worth it to me because I would hate every second of it. And it wouldn't be my best work and probably would never be produced. So what's the point? I can write more comic books. Michael Hutcherson, which of your works do you think would make a great animated movie and why? When the Joker is white hot, why aren't they adapting Joker's Devil's Advocate or Joker's Last Laugh? Well, the thing is that, a lot of comic book writers have, Hollywood connections, and they can suggest that their comic book project, or perhaps their agent can suggest that this comic book project they worked on might also make a good animated thing. The other little secret is that licensors and the animation studios and everything else, they will come to the company, and I remember them coming to DC and saying, what's hot? What suggestions do you have for things we should be working on or looking at? And so if you're on the mind or in the circle of the editors at the time, they'll suggest your work. Hey, this might make a good cartoon, or this character might make a good action figure. So there's that suggestion process as well. And I'm not really on the minds of anyone at DC Comics. I've been out of the club for a long time, and Joker Devil's Advocate is pretty much a completely forgotten project. Even most comic book fans these days, unless you were around at the time, don't know about it. And Joker's Last Laugh has, it's been reprinted a few times, but it's never been made a thing of. So, there's nobody there to advocate for it. That's basically, and you can see by the projects that do get done, that's the case. There are people that are still on the mind of DC or still currently working at DC, or projects that DC has always kind of been fond of. But it is kind of a shame that both Devil's Advocate and Last Laugh have never been animated, because they really are very much Joker centric, obviously, and very much all laid out. Story's all there, and it's all beginning, middle, and end. It's all done in one. But yeah, maybe someday. Maybe someday. Maybe there's you know uh, a budding animation producer or animation director out there who's a fan of those properties, and he'll bring them up at a pitch meeting someday, and maybe they'll get done. Who knows? My the biggest disappointment was when Batgirl Year One didn't get made into an animated film, because they were talking about it for a while, but it didn't happen, because I thought that would have been perfect. So they made a motion comic of it, but they never made an animated film. But as I said, maybe someday. They'll get around to all of it eventually. Igor Texiera. Do you prefer comic book art that's more classical and tamed, or is the modern things flying out of every panel more your cup of tea? Well, it's comics. It's kind of a mix of both. Comics are in your face. They're immediate entertainment. They're an immediate experience. And they've got to fight for your attention because it's just pictures on paper. So yeah, I'm fine with in your face, outrageous moments, but not all the time. A comic book turned up to 11 all the time gets dull. I want to see some craft. I want to see some storytelling, some quiet moments. Not everything is fantastic and a phantasmagoria all the time. But mostly it comes down to craft, because if it's going to be in your face, or it's going to be, you know, classic storytelling, uh, they both need the craft. And, you know, I've done both. I worked with Scott McDaniel. Scott McDaniel stuff practically is three-dimensional. You know, it just jumps off the page, jumps out of the panels at you. But he was also good at the quiet stuff. People forget that about Kirby too. Kirby was good at those quiet moments. You know, the doer thing, talking to Reed Richards. Um, you know, Ditko as well. You know, all the classic Marvel guys, all the classic comic artists entirely were good at those quiet moments. They could make them interesting. But you know, like I said, that requires craft. To do page after page of pinups and stunt shots and, you know, big action, it just gets tired after a while. So I like a mix. I like a mix of the two. That's the real challenge, is to make those quiet moments. Graham Nolan's another one. Graham Nolan is a master at making quiet moments interesting and engaging. Okay, Don Perkage, you've mentioned you haven't been too pleased with some of the Punisher movie and television adaptations due to being a writer for the source material. Well, and a fan. Is there any comic material you've written where you would like to be brought in to create movie or television versions? Also, if you were brought in, would you prefer to be a showrunner or a writer? Well, on the Punisher thing, I mean, they just get it wrong. The Punisher is the perfect action hero because he creates all of his own problems. He, you know, basically looks before he leaps, you know, jumps in without thinking, and that creates all kinds of complications for him and creates all kinds of enemies for him. And in any classic Punisher story, it's a one against all mega firefight at the end. And the movies just seem, and the television show just seem to miss that point. Um, you know, the Thomas Jane movie, he acted too much like a detective, and it's not the Punisher. Punisher isn't working his way up to the big guy. He's killing all the little guys until the big guy comes after him. And then the John Bernthal, and John Bernthal is perfectly cast as the Punisher. He's a perfect Frank Castle. Um, it's a little too emo for me. Now, as far as things I'd like to see of my own creations, I'd love to see Winterworld on the big screen. It's gotten close to be either a series or a feature, and you know, you learn when you're dealing with Hollywood to, you know, turn your heart to stone. You don't get enthused and excited when you hear from an agent or a producer. You just kind of like, you know, it's like, you know, you drop the coin in the slot of the in Vegas. You know, you pull the arm and you hope, but you don't start spending that money because, you know, all you're going to have to do is put another quarter in. So yeah, Winterworld, I'd like to see made. I think it's a natural. As far as being a showrunner or being involved in production, I have no interest. Absolutely no interest. Uh, so I mean, basically, I just want them to, you know, write the check, and then hopefully they'll make something worthy of it. Although I don't even have that much faith in that. And people say, well, what if they took your property and they made an awful movie? Well, the comic still exists. The comic is still eternal. You know, how many rotten comic book movies have you seen? But you say, you know, yeah, the movie is awful, but boy, I still love that comic book. I mean, a bad movie isn't going to make you hate a good comic book. You're going to remember that it was good. If anything, a bad movie is going to remind you even more that the comic book was good. I mean, a really good comic book movie might make you forget the comic book. Uh, so, so it's, you know, win-win, win-lose, whatever. I'm currently working on something with Frank Fosco for Arctoons called Something Big, and it's a heist story set in near future after Earth has been invaded by uh, aliens and taken over. So it's an apocalyptic thing, and Frank's doing a hell of a job on the artwork. And I thought, you know, I'd love to see that made into like a feature for Netflix or whatever. I think it's a natural, and hey, maybe it'll happen. Maybe it'll happen. By the way, you can go over to Arctoons and check it out for free. See the opening episodes for free. Joe Frankenstein's another one. It's a basically it's a Graham Nolan creation that he brought me on board kindly to help him write. So it's something the two of us have a stake in. And we've talked to a few people about it, but nothing's come of it so far. But Joe Frankenstein's a worthy property. Uh, Seems to be the kind of thing they're looking for all the time. A young lead character, a familiar genre, and it's got all the action and humor and character complications that they seem to dig in the streaming services, and the viewers like too. So maybe something will happen with Joe Frankenstein. But those would be my top three picks of the dozens and dozens of things I've created. Angelo Colasso. Is it true when often people say there's no money in comics? Why do some people do well financially in comics while others fail to make a meaningful income? Well, there's an old saying in comics: if you want to make $1 million in comic books, start with 2 million. And more people have lost more money. I've seen people go bankrupt. I've seen people go from being multimillionaires to broke on their butts because they got into the comic book business. And in every instance, when I met those people and they talked about getting into comics, I tried to talk them out of it. I'm not one of those guys who go, "Oh, you got millions of dollars. Well, pay me to write some comics." My first warning is always, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Because there could be ruination ahead. Because it's a tough game, especially comic book publishing. Publishing in paper, publishing monthly periodicals. It's risky now because, let's face it, they're in their twilight. Individuals can certainly make money. There's lots of people who do very well through crowdfunding, making a living, making a good living, and having the addition of that creative freedom. But the real money in comic books hasn't been in comic books in decades. It's in the movies. It's in the action figures. It's in the ancillary stuff. If you can get your comic book character to the point where they want to make a movie, a television show, an action figure, a throw pillow, whatever out of it, that's where the real money is. Comic books themselves, for the publishers, haven't been profitable in a long, long time. In fact, Denny O'Neil once told me that Nightfall was our Nightfall stunt was the last time DC Comics was profitable. It was the last profitable project they had from a purely publishing venture. And it continues to be profitable. Nightfall to this day continues to make money in the various editions and the rest of it. But nothing they did after that, rang the bell, moved the needle, attracted new readers, brought anybody into the comic stores. So it's been a dwindling market ever since then. So if you want to make money in comics, think about movies and TV and ancillary and aim for that, because that's the only way you're going to make a killing. You can have a good living in working comics, but you got to work. If you want to retire with a buttload of money, come up with something that Hollywood wants. Jernovi, or Jernovi, or Jernovi. Will the woke comics brigade continue to dump on Trump, who at this point lives rent-free in their collective heads? And if so, what will this do to the industry as a whole? I think Trump still very much lives in their heads because he's like the punchline to every joke. He's, they love attacking him, and he's the target of their, every hateful thought. And consequently, they chased away a large portion of the comic book readership who didn't agree with them. I mean, for contrast, let's look at Richard Nixon. The media and the left hated Richard Nixon. In my entire lifetime, they hated Richard Nixon. When I was born, they were hating Richard Nixon because he was the vice president of the United States and he was very much an anti-communist. And they hated him for it. There was a group, people that were the anti-communists. They thought that the Red Scare and all the rest of it was just hysteria. And even to this day, the conventional wisdom is that, worrying about communists being under the bed, that was silly. Well, it wasn't silly. There were people in our government There were people in the entertainment industry. There were people in positions of power in this country who not only were communists, but they held military rank in, in the Soviet military intelligence agency. And we know this from the Verona papers that were shared with us when the Soviet Union fell, that all the people who were suspected of being commies were commies. And Nixon put Alger Hiss in jail. And for my whole childhood, I would hear about Alger Hiss, that he was innocent, he was framed, and everything else. Well, Boris Yeltsin released all those records, and we confirmed that Mr. Hiss was guilty as hell. I think he was a major in the NKVD, so they certainly recognized him as a commie. And Nixon was right. So, but they hated him for it, and his revenge was he became president of the United States. And when he did that, comic books treated him with the honor and respect of the office. Richard Nixon appeared in Marvel Comics and DC Comics a number of times, and he was never treated disrespectfully. He was treated accurately as Richard Nixon, in the Marvel universe and the DC universe. And because not only is it the office of the president, because, you could have a complete moron become president and he wouldn't be worthy of your respect, but the office is. Why? Because people voted for that guy. Because a vast majority of your fellow Americans thought he was the right man for the job. And you've got to honor their decision. You've got to honor their vote, no matter how sore you feel about it, even if it isn't your guy. And I've been in that position. There have been presidents in my lifetime, and like, oh my gosh, I got to go through 4 or 8 years of this clown. But the thing is that Trump is gone, but if you're lazy, he's still a target. And more so, his supporters are a target. And you see this more and more over fandom. And not just comics fandom, movie fandom and sports fans are getting abuse heaped on them by, the people that they're supposed to idolize, either creators or athletes or movie stars. And they're having scorn heaped on them because, it's like, I don't want Trump supporters to buy my comic. I don't want you to come see my movie. I don't want you to come watch me play basketball if you're a Trump supporter. And it's like, well, what kind of thinking is that? As Michael Jordan said, Republicans buy sneakers too. So why would you? And that's the thing. The hatred for Trump spreads to his supporters as well. That they have a horrible opinion of these people, and that they're it's a bunch of hayseed hillbillies. They're like the front row of a Willie Nelson concert, all of them, and that's simply not true. If you've been to a Trump rally or just talked to other Trump supporters, they come from all walks of life. They're all kinds of people, and again, they voted. They voted for Donald Trump for president. And you've got to respect that. Even if you don't like Donald Trump, you got to respect that these people saw something in Donald Trump they liked, and they voted for him enthusiastically by the tens of millions. And you have to respect that we live in a representative republic, not a pure democracy. And if something you like doesn't happen, you got to wait till the next election to straighten it out. You got to make your case. But all in all, I mean, here we are. Here I am talking politics. And we're forgetting what this is about. And for comic book publishers, this is what it's about. It's getting people to read the comic books, getting them to pick it up, take a look, and maybe buy it. It's a business. It's a publishing business. And you don't want to tick off half of your readership. And also, you got international sales to think about. There's all kinds of practical considerations when you're making a comic book. You have to make them as universally appealing as possible. I mean, everybody loves Superman, but they may love Superman for a different reason. They project themselves on these characters. And if you present these characters in such a way that it thwarts their projection, if you want to believe that Ant-Man is a Republican, great. If you want to believe he's a Democrat, great. If you want to believe he's a Mormon, whatever. Okay. But when the comic book presents something that contradicts or presents a political point of view, or a religious point of view, or a moral point of view, you know, coming from that character, suddenly your projection on that character is thwarted, and you no longer can relate to it. You know, and that's the thing when you're presenting material to children and comic book superheroes, and that's what we're talking about here, because that's all anybody cares about is the superheroes. When you're talking about the superheroes, they're children's wish fulfillment fantasies. I don't care if you're 42 years old reading these and have children of your own. They're still, you got to admit, children wish fulfillment fantasies. And you don't want to do anything, particularly something as tawdry as politics. You don't want to do anything to get in the way of that fantasy. You want to present it clean, pure, and just let everybody have a good time. Escapist fiction, let them have a good time. Let them just enjoy reading your work, not make it a labor, not try to make them feel bad, or worse, make them feel unwelcome. Michael Hutchison again. I'm going to give you a twin spin someday, but not today, buddy. Today is not your day, Michael. Chuck, you talked about being offered Denny O's job as bat editor. You turned it down for sensible reasons, living in New York, the changing vibe at DC, suspecting it wouldn't be a long gig. Also the pay. I would have taken a cut in pay. But you must have mulled it over. I fantasized about it. I really didn't mull it over. I really didn't consider it seriously at all. I mean, gave Denny an answer right then and there. No. And he said, I thought she'd say that. Okay, but Michael goes on, or Hutch goes on. What would a Dixon Batverse of books have been like? Who would you have put on various titles? Well, I would have put myself on a few, but I would have put Scott McDaniel either back on Nightwing or on some kind of Batman title. You know, a Scott McDaniel run on Robin would be fun, wouldn't it? And of course, I try to woo my buddy Graham Nolan back. Graham at that time had moved out of comic books and was working in the comic strips. He was working on Rex Morgan, MD, and the Phantom for the King Features Syndicate, doing very well there. And, you know, steady paycheck and all that. He wisely got out of comics when the getting was good. But I'd woo him back because, you know, he's like me. He works well ahead of schedule. He'd have time to squeeze in a few special projects here and there. I wouldn't expect him to do a monthly because he'd have to give up the King Features gig. But I'd love to have seen him continue his Tales of the Batcave series that he started. He was writing and drawing it, and I love those stories. I would welcome him back to do that, do more of them. Kelly Jones, I bring Kelly Jones back and unleash him on a Batman title. Pick one of the Batman titles and have it concentrated on a more supernatural angle. Denny didn't like supernatural stories, so Kelly really, except for, you know, Elseworld stuff, never really got to you know, flex that muscle on the regular Batman title. But I don't have a problem with Batman and Supernatural as long as it's isolated to one title. And I would do that. I would, you know, either a monthly Batman book that would concentrate on Supernatural, or specials. You know, do like a retro 70s weird Batman stories with the title weird, with the, you know, weird in the title, just like they did in the 70s. I'd ask Scott Peterson to come back and do some writing. Scott was my longtime editor on a number of Batman titles and has a very, very keen understanding and an earnest approach to the character that I always liked. I always enjoyed his writing on them. Well, anytime he did writing, well, he wrote a ton of Batman Adventure stuff, as well as, you know, for the regular continuity, but I would definitely bring him back. Another writer I would bring back was Kelly Puckett. Kelly Puckett was never terribly prolific, but every damn story he wrote was a gem. Every single one he wrote was a gem. And he wasn't really built for monthlies, but I would definitely encourage him to do, you know, standalones, you know, prestige books, graphic novels, specials, annuals, whatever. I would bring Kelly Puckett back and say, look, what Batman character do you want to work on? Do something. You know, pitch me some projects, or I tell him things I would want him to write. But Kelly always delivered. I always look forward to his stories. Another thing that we talked about a little bit toward the end of Denny's run that I would explore is Batman sells really well in different countries. Actually, I had as many readers of my Batman stuff in Italy as I did in the United States. And Italy's a much smaller country than the United States. But our sales on Detective Comics were almost identical in the United States and Italy. And we had talked toward the end of Denny's run about doing Batman stories set in various countries and work out a co-publication deal with our licensors in those European countries. I mean, we had regular licensors in Europe that would take DC material and translate it into their languages. We thought, well, let's do a Batman Goes to Rome. Let's do Batman Goes to Paris. Batman Goes to Berlin. Batman Goes to Copenhagen. Why not? And not only make them set in Europe, but get some European creators. Do some. I mean, my idea would be to expand it even larger and do one of those honkin' big Italian phone book comics in black and white with Batman. Do a French style graphic album with Batman, the Belgian style, like, the larger format. And, we have an international audience. Let's exploit it. Let's make it bigger. And plus, we'd be creating material that could be distributed here in the United States as well in English in different formats. It would allow us to experiment with different formats to attract different readers here in the United States, and it would be a no risk way to do it because the costs would be covered by the European publication. My thoughts were, if you put a Batman French style album, that big oversized with the heavily laminated cover, and it's in hardcover, you stick that in a bookstore or even a children's section at a bookstore, and you're going to attract a different reader than the reader that you would attract with a comic book. Same thing for the telephone book size. The Italian, because Italian comics are always long. They're always 150 pages to 300 pages long. Who wouldn't want to read a big feature length, novel length Batman story done in that style? And again, you stick that in a bookstore or a newsstand, and you're going to attract a different kind of reader because it's a different looking product. It's not just another comic book. It's something else, and you would probably get curious readers to pick it up and find a whole new readership for it. In much the same way that the Marvel had success with Spider-Girl, with tweeny girls, because they made a book that was formatted. It was a little bit smaller. The collections were a little bit smaller than a comic. They were chunkier, and they would stick them in the young adult section at bookstores, and tweeny girls found them and loved them, and they sold a lot. And these are girls who would never go to the comic rack, never pick up a Spider-Girl comic. But this format and the packaging and the trade dress attracted them. That's the kind of thing you have to do to increase sales. So that's what I would have done with Batman. I would have just, tried to expand the readership. Try to put Batman in front of as many people as possible, as many ways as possible, with as little risk as possible. So yeah, as you can see, I did fantasize about it. And of course, I do more pirate Batman. Because every editor gets to do something they want to do, even if it's not commercially successful. Although I think a few more Batman projects set on the Spanish Main, we would have done okay. Yeah, that's some of the stuff I would have done. So there you go. Michael Hawkins, did your parents and relatives encourage you when you told them you wanted to be a comic book writer or artist? Did anyone try to steer you away, saying it was an impractical career? Incredibly, no. I can't say that my parents were like incredibly supportive, like, you can do it, son, as much as they weren't discouraging. Now, when I was a kid, they knew I was a little different because I was hospitalized as a kid. I mean, seriously hospitalized. A lot of, surgeries to correct some birth defects. How severe were the birth defects? Well, that's me on the left in this picture. So, I grew up reading a lot of comics. I grew up isolated quite a bit, not playing outside with the other kids because I couldn't. Eventually I did, But my young years, all the way up to like 7, comic books were my whole world. Uh, and everybody would bring me comic books because they knew I liked them. And in fact, the doctor even prescribed them to my mother because she was concerned I wasn't going to pass first grade because I missed all but 31 days of first grade. I was only in first grade for a month. And this was spread out over time. I'd be there a couple of days here, a couple of days there. The rest of the time, I'd be at the hospital or visiting the clinic or homesick from complications. And she said to the doctor, our family doctor, I don't know what to do. I don't want him to be left back. I want him to go on to second grade, but he needs to pass reading. That's the one thing they told me. If he can read at a first grade level, he can go on to the second. And the doctor said, well, does he like to read? And my mother said, well, yeah. And the doctor said, well, what does he like to read? My mother said, well, he loves comic books. The doctor said, buy him every comic book he wants. Thank you, Doc. I was sitting there during this. I mean, you know how when you're a kid, they talk about you like you're not there. And I'm like, ooh, every comic book I want. And, they were only a dime, 12 cents back then. So big deal. And you could buy bundles of them at the farmer's market, which my dad did. My dad would come home on a Friday night with a bundle of comics tied in twine. It'd be all different kinds of comics. And I was in heaven. And I did pass 6th grade. I was reading Stan Lee. Stan Lee can improve your vocabulary overnight, with the big words, big 50-cent words he would use. A couple of Fantastic Four comics and, Reed Richards talking about, whatever, antimatter. And I was way above a first grade reading level when I went into 2nd grade. So there you go. So in a way, I was encouraged simply because they gave me so many comic books. Now, I realized all I wanted to do was work in comics. I didn't want to do anything else. And I didn't think I could be good at anything else. And, all these years on the planet have proven me right. I can't do anything. I can't drive a nail straight. So I worked a lot of donkey dead-end jobs. I mean, college was out for me. We really couldn't afford it. And what were they going to teach me at college that would help me with comic writing career or comic drawing career? Because I still had the idea that I might be a comic artist as well. So I worked a lot of dead-end donkey jobs. I was a janitor, I was a security guard. I set pins in a bowling alley. Yeah, there were still bowling alleys without automatic pin setters. Never take that job. It was dangerous. I got hit with a bowling pin in the knee and I had a limp for a month. I drove an ice cream truck, which was fun. I worked graveyard shift at a 7-Eleven, which taught me more about humanity than, well, I guess I would have had to have been a cop to learn more about humanity than I did at working at a 7-Eleven overnights. The best job I had that entire time was on an assembly line at Burroughs, assembling computers. Yeah, these kind of computers, because this was the 70s. The idea of owning a computer at your house was literally a joke. There's a Woody Allen movie in which he makes a joke about owning a computer at home because it was an impossible dream. Nobody ever thought. It's like, I'm going to have a fighter jet in my garage. Who's ever going to own a computer? So I worked the assembly line and I was there for about 3 months. I hated it. And everyone else on the assembly line hated it too. So I got a back condition working over one of the benches that they wanted me to work on. I was wiring mainframes. I had no idea what I was doing. I pity anybody. I hope none of these went on to the Pentagon or NASA. We could lose a war over my soldering and wire connecting. But anyway, I got these terrible back pains. They sent me to the company doctor, and the company doctor took x-rays. And then he said, you really hate this job, don't you? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, you're feeling it in your back. So I quit. Much to the disappointment of my dad, who thought, well, at least he's got gainful employment. But he never discouraged me. He said, okay, I guess you're going to find something else to do for a living. So I would, do my silly drawings and write my silly pitches. And my parents put up with it. They never said anything about it. They never said, don't do this. This isn't right for you. This is not going to go anywhere for you. I knew the risks. I knew that the chances of becoming a successful comic creator were pretty high. The chances against it, I should say. But I kept plugging at it because seriously, it was the only thing I thought would make me happy. I couldn't think of any other endeavor that wouldn't be second best. And I worked in children's books and I worked in advertising. I worked in different creative endeavors, but I didn't feel it. I mean, I enjoyed working in children's books. I enjoyed working with advertising people, but I didn't see it as something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. You know, so young kid with a dream. You know, this young punk wise ass hanging around the comic shops and pestering people at Marvel and DC. I finally got in because I burnt my bridge behind me. I had no plan B, and when you have no plan B, you're going to hit plan A as hard as you can, and just try to get in there. And I did. And once I got in there, I was never going to leave, and I never did leave. I'm still plugging away. I'm writing as many comics now as I ever did, and still enjoying it. Still getting up in the morning and looking forward to it. Enthusiastic about the medium. I love it. And thanks for the question. And yeah, and thanks to my parents because they didn't say, you're an idiot. Get an education, get a decent job. This isn't going to work out for you. I never heard that from them once. Now they probably talked about it when I couldn't hear. Parents have a lot of conversations about their kids when their kids can't hear, but I never heard it from them. I never heard anything at all. And in fact, my mom didn't, but my dad did get to live to see me be successful in comics. Have a family and a nice big house, and a new car, all kinds of things that he never had. As hard as he worked in his life, he never had. And he did tell me one day how proud he was of me, that I, against all odds, I succeeded at what it was I wanted to do. That I went for it, I took the risks, and I got it. And he was very, very proud of me. So a lot of people don't get that moment, and I still recall it today, and it meant a lot to me. But what meant more to me was that, they weren't down on my ideas. They were, just sort of cautiously watching me go from failure to failure, hoping that someday it might work out for me, or someday I might come to my senses and get a real job. So anyway, hey, if you want to support that kid with a dream, you can go to Patreon, to Archaven, and become a subscriber. $1, $3, $5, and you help me produce the work that I am producing at Arctunes. And you got to check out Arctunes if you haven't already. It's free. You just go to archaven.com and just look at the, hundreds and hundreds of projects and everything else we have. We have ongoings and miniseries and, public domain section for classic comics that I present, all kinds of stuff. I mean, just a wealth, an Aladdin's cave of new comics book material for you to look at in high res on any device you own, including the one you're watching this video on. And it's free, 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 free. But I would really appreciate the support. Hey, that's it for this week. I will see you all down the road. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.